You know that person who sabotages good things? The one who finds reasons to leave before they can be left? Who struggles to trust the people who actually show up? Who feels more comfortable in chaos than in calm? Because calm, somewhere deep in their psychology, has always felt like the silence before something goes wrong. The one who has spent their entire adult life trying to build something stable on a foundation that was cracked before they were old enough to understand what foundations were for. That person isn't broken. That person isn't self-destructive. That person isn't making their life harder on purpose. That person is a child who learned to survive, and an adult who never got the manual for what comes after surviving. Today, on Mentra Psychology, we're breaking down the psychology of childhood trauma, what it did to the child, what it's doing to the adult, and what the science says about how to finally, gently, begin to heal it. Stay with me. Let's dismantle the story that childhood trauma leaves behind, because it does leave a story. A quiet, persistent, deeply personal narrative that follows you into every room, every relationship, every moment of stillness long enough for the past to catch up with the present. The story that says the way you react is too much, that the walls you built are too high, that the hypervigilance, the difficulty trusting, the tendency to expect abandonment in the middle of perfectly good love are character flaws, proof of something fundamentally wrong with the way you were put together. That story feels true. It has felt true for a long time, but it was never about your character. It was always about your history. Here's the reframe that changes everything. Childhood trauma doesn't produce broken adults. It produces incredibly adaptive ones. People whose minds and bodies developed the most sophisticated survival strategies available to them at the time, with the resources they had in the environment they were given. The problem was never that those strategies failed you. The problem is that they worked so well, for so long, that your nervous system never received the signal that the danger had passed. You weren't damaged by what happened to you. You were shaped by it. And there is a profound, life-changing difference between those two things that the psychology of childhood trauma needs you to understand before anything else. So if you've ever felt like you were too much and not enough at the same time, welcome. If you've ever wondered why love feels dangerous, why calm feels suspicious, why you keep finding yourself in the middle of patterns you can see clearly but can't seem to stop, welcome. If you've ever looked at your own reactions and felt ashamed of them, without anyone ever stopping to explain where those reactions actually came from, welcome. You're in the right place. And if this is already resonating, go ahead and subscribe to Mentra Psychology. This community was built for exactly the conversations most people are too afraid to start. Because the psychology of childhood trauma isn't a topic that gets enough honest, science-backed, genuinely compassionate airtime, and the people who carry it, quietly, privately, often without a single person in their life who fully understands the weight of it, deserve more than a generic reminder to practice self-care. They deserve an explanation, not of what's wrong with them, of what happened to them. And today, that's exactly what this video is going to give you. Today, on Mentra Psychology, we're breaking down the psychology of childhood trauma, not the clinical checklist version. The real psychology, the neuroscience, the physiology, the science behind what happens to a developing mind when the environment that was supposed to feel safe, consistently, fundamentally, didn't. Because childhood trauma was never just about the event. It was about what that event taught a developing nervous system to believe about safety, love, and worth. Society calls the effects of childhood trauma overreacting. Science calls them survival. Here's where the psychology of childhood trauma gets fascinating, and where the science finally gives language to something you may have felt your entire life without being able to explain. When a child experiences trauma, the brain doesn't process it the way an adult brain would, because the brain isn't finished yet. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic, emotional regulation, and making sense of complex experiences, is still under construction throughout childhood and adolescence. Which means that when trauma occurs, the developing brain can't file it away cleanly, contextualize it accurately, or process it completely. Instead, it gets stored somewhere else entirely, in the body, in the nervous system, in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, which doesn't distinguish between a memory and a present moment danger. It simply fires, every time, with the same urgency it had the first time. And here's the psychological fact that should reframe everything. Research from Harvard's Center on the Developing Child found that childhood trauma, what scientists call toxic stress, physically alters the architecture of the developing brain. Not metaphorically, literally. The neural connections responsible for learning, memory, emotional regulation, and stress response are measurably, structurally different in children who experienced chronic trauma versus those who didn't. Let that land. The hypervigilance you've carried into adulthood, the hair-trigger stress response, the difficulty calming down once activated, the way your body reacts before your mind has time to think, that wasn't a weakness you developed. That was a brain that rewired itself around the trauma, because rewiring was the only way to survive it. And here's the WTF fact that the childhood trauma psychology community needs to hear more often. A landmark study by researchers Vincent Folletti and Robert Anda, known as the ACE study, or Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, followed over 17,000 participants and found that childhood trauma was the single most significant predictor of mental health outcomes, physical health outcomes, and life expectancy in adulthood. Not genetics, not socioeconomic status, not lifestyle choices. Childhood trauma. The science isn't saying your past defines you, it's saying your past shaped you in ways that were never your fault, never your choice, and never, not for a single moment, a reflection of your worth. But the neuroscience only explains what happened to the brain. It doesn't explain what happened to the child's understanding of themselves. Psychologists call it attachment disruption, the breakdown of the fundamental belief that the world is safe and the people in it can be trusted. And when that disruption happens early enough, it doesn't just affect relationships. It becomes the lens through which everything is interpreted. Love feels conditional. Kindness feels suspicious. Stability feels temporary. Not because those things aren't real, but because the child who needed to believe in them was shown, too early and too painfully, that they could disappear. And here's the part of the childhood trauma psychology that almost never gets discussed. The same adaptations that made survival possible, the hypervigilance, the emotional sensitivity, the ability to read a room before anyone else has registered that something is wrong, don't disappear in adulthood. They transform. Psychologists call it post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon where individuals who have experienced significant early adversity develop capabilities, perspectives, and emotional depth that a protected, uninterrupted childhood simply cannot produce. And here's the psychological fact that should genuinely shift something in you. Research published in the Journal of Traumatic Stress found that survivors of childhood trauma who received adequate support and engaged in intentional healing reported significantly higher levels of empathy, emotional intelligence, creative thinking, and sense of personal meaning than the general population. The child who had to learn to survive became the adult who understood more about the human experience than most people will ever be asked to know. Here's the fact that should stop you completely. Some of the most compassionate leaders, most gifted artists, most transformative therapists, and most extraordinary human beings in modern history are survivors of childhood trauma. Not despite what happened to them, but because of what they built from it. Your sensitivity isn't a wound that never healed. It's a wound that became a window into yourself, into others, into the kind of depth that only the people who have truly suffered and truly survived are ever given access to. The child who learned to survive became the adult with the most extraordinary capacity to feel. And feeling, deeply, completely, without apology, is not the burden the world made it out to be. It is, in the right hands, the most powerful thing a human being can do. Let's talk about a world that told you to get over it, that equated silence with strength and vulnerability with weakness, that handed you the message, through family systems, school systems, social systems, that what happened to you wasn't that bad, that other people had it worse, that talking about it was self-pity and healing was self-indulgence, that culture wasn't protecting you, it was protecting itself from the discomfort of your truth. Your trauma was real, your response to it was rational, and your healing is not optional. Now, honesty matters here. Post-traumatic growth doesn't happen automatically. It requires intentional, supported, often uncomfortable work. And for many survivors of childhood trauma, that work is best done with professional guidance. Approaches like EMDR, somatic therapy, and trauma-informed cognitive behavioral therapy have demonstrated significant, measurable results in helping adults process and integrate childhood trauma. Not erase it, but metabolize it. Understanding your psychology is the first step. Getting support is the next one. But for the survivor who is genuinely doing the work, You are not your trauma. You are what survived it. The sensitivity, the depth, the extraordinary capacity for empathy that only this specific journey could have produced. The child who learned to survive became the adult the world quietly needs most. Psychologists call it post-traumatic growth. On Mentra Psychology, we call it the quiet transformation of every person who was asked to carry too much, too young, too alone. You didn't just survive your childhood. You built something extraordinary from it. And that, not what happened to you, but what you became because of it, is your real story. Have you ever recognized childhood trauma in your own patterns? Drop it in the comments. This community holds space for exactly that conversation. If this video found you at the right moment, subscribe to Mentra Psychology. The next video goes even deeper. Click it. You'll understand why.